Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I see many participants showing up, and thank you to Melanie and the Center for Fiction for hosting our conversation. Um, I'm moderating. I'm going to in advance apologize for any interruptions. I have a kindergartner doing music class on a computer downstairs. Another one will shortly arrive. There are cats. So I'm sure many are in the same situation. And I know there's Jessica, I believe you have infant twins at home.
Yeah, they're safely out for now, but yeah.
Good. My youngest one is also safely out. So, um, uh, and so thank you both so much for being here. Maylis, I love your work so much. I reviewed The Heart, as it was called, for the U.S. Publication for The Guardian, and a few years ago, and it was just a book that moved me so much. I really love your writing, and so the opportunity to read and discuss Painting Time was uh, a huge pleasure. And just as soon as I picked up the book and started reading, I was really transported back to the experience of reading The Heart,
Oh,
and just felt so kind of grateful to be in your hands again as a prose writer. So I thank you for this novel, for your beautiful work, Jessica, for your translation, which is stellar, and which we will talk about. So if you are here and you haven't already purchased Painting Time, I really urge you to do so, because it's a just a gorgeous book, and it made me feel hopeful in a way. Even there's nothing particularly hopeful about it, but it just um, I think sometimes a beautiful aesthetic experience can lift you up in a way you forget that you need, sometimes, especially during hard times. So our conversation is sort of meant to focus on translation, the practice of translation. I realized while I was preparing that you know each other sort of beyond this. I read a conversation between the two of you in Bomb magazine from a few years ago, and so I know your relationship is long, which is wonderful. I wonder if we can start just with a very kind of prosaic question about sort of the logistics about translation, for lay people. I really don't know kind of what goes into the process of, um, for our first interruption has arrived. So, Miley's, if I lock him out, then he just claws on the door the whole time. So there really is no solution but for him to attend also. So, Miley's, I know you have a translator for your American publications, but then Jessica has translated your books for Canada and the UK. So I'm curious just how, from the author's perspective, do you sort of have a say in selecting translators? Is that something the publisher handles? And then once the translator, is secured and you have the contract, how much involvement do you have sort of going through, or is it more kind of at the end you get involved? If you could just sort of lay it out for us.
yes. First, I want to thank the Center of Fiction to speak about Painting Time and to share it with you. First, I want to say that all began with Jessica with Birth of a Bridge which was 10. But in fact, at that time, the publisher all completely the choice of the foreign publisher, and also the translator. So didn't take any part in the choice. With Men, the Living, and The Heart, I don't know why exactly. It's not comfortable for me, but there were two translations, one in English by Jessica, translated by Jessica, and it was Men, the Living, and the other, The Heart, by Sam Taylor. And they were two fantastic translations and very important, but quite different. And I realized that in perhaps the translator is perhaps kind of author. I mean, he writes the book, is author book, because the first pages of Men, the Living, and the Heart were not the same, and they were very interesting in their own way, but they were not the same. So the place of subjectivity and the place of the proper read of each translator was very, very apparent to me. And for that book painting time, I asked not to again two translator, because for me it was complicated. It was very, because two titles also. So the book where when I was traveling and presenting the book in, for example, India or England, or in a country where it is English spoken, it occurred to me problems. And also I was always asked to choose what was the best, and it was not very sympathetic for me. I didn't like it very much, so I just asked to have only one. And Sam Taylor translated The Cook, and perhaps we decided to perhaps ask Jessica if she was free to translate Painting Time. And also because Jessica, I started with her, and she had translated two novels which were important, Birth of a Bridge and Men the Living. And so we decided to follow with her, but it was not, to avoid Sam Taylor, who is a great translator, of course. And you see, it was not good for me. I didn't feel very comfortable. Felt very comfortable to always have to answer why there were two translators, but this is to say that, in fact, when I was with students, for example, to share with them what is perhaps the purpose of translation in what we call travaux pratiques, I mean practical courses, it was very, it was a good thing to have these two translations to speak about what is translation. So that is, it was like that. And I can just perhaps follow saying that Jessica and me are connected, and I think she's perhaps one of the person who knows me the best, but we knows each other by the books, and our meeting and our friendship, our link is inside literature, takes place inside language, inside writing, inside literature. We are not used to have many contacts, but when she's free to ask me a question, and I tried always to answer to her. And in France, there was a program which has been developed in Arles to gather all the translation around one novel, and I was there with 10 translators, and we could work together. And Jessica was not with us in France, but she tried to follow all this workshop. So it was very interesting.
Well, that I really see as a writer why that would be incredibly stressful to have to kind of manage the process of having kind of two simultaneous translation projects happening. So that makes a lot of sense to me. That would be an experience you would not want to reproduce. But also so fascinating now, because when I reviewed The Heart, I reviewed the American translation by Sam Taylor. So I'm now so curious to kind of, I would love to compare. That is a great exercise for students on sort of the intricacies of translation. So Jessica, I will ask you, how you got into this work to begin with. And, you know, is it something you kind of like audition for? I really know so little about it. And then about your process as a translator. And so now this is, I believe, the third novel by Maylis that you have translated, you know, how sort of long the process takes, and just if in the same way you could lay it out for us.
Sure. So the way I came to literary translation was a little bit roundabout or synchronous looking back. You know, the way that once you've arrived at a point in your life, you can look back and see the turns that led you to that place. So I had always wanted to be a writer and had intended to just go to university for English literature. And then because I had a very convincing roommate and friend, she got me to go with her to Aix-en-Provence for a year. And so then at the end of that year, after having studied some translation and studied French literature, and I did have a base in French already, it meant that I graduated with both French and English, and that suddenly opened this door up for my master's to be, I could apply to writing programs, but I could also apply to translation. And literary translation appealed and continues to appeal to me so much from the perspective of being a writer as well, which I think is probably the greatest strength that a translator brings to the work, more beyond being perfectly fluent, being able to handle your own first language and write it hopefully beautifully is the most important piece. So it was the love of writing, and then next to that a love of sort of puzzling things out or arranging things. Like I used to, when I was a kid, one of my favorite things was to rearrange the spices in my mom's cupboard and just like have them just aligned. And I had a book of puzzles called Alice in Puzzle Land, which I wish maybe it does still exist. I would like to get this for my children. But so these two things, puzzling out and then having the pleasure of something sort of landing in a way that was pleasing and somehow honoring the original, and then the work of writing too. And in terms of how long, well, I wanted to also just say that I think, as you asked about for the layperson, what it's like for the author and the translator when a translation is happening. But I think I need to say that the author has almost nothing to do with it while the translation is happening. I go off with my work of translation, and I'm working on it for maybe 8 months without any contact with Maylis. So it's really in the hands of me and the English publisher at that point. And then there's for me the stage at the end when I've saved the most precious of the questions that I feel are worthy of asking or puzzling enough to need to ask her. And then the length of time is also partly dependent on the fact that I don't depend on literary translation entirely for making a living. I wouldn't be able to. So I'm never only doing that. I'm doing other kinds of translation and other little jobs. So that means that the work on a novel can be stretched out over about a year, between 8 months to a year, which is really lucky because then it has also the chance to rest before before the final revisions are done and before it comes out.
Yeah. So it has to marinate.
Yes.
Well, thank you. I mean, it makes sense to hear you say that it's not, you know, you sort of sit with the work for an extended period of time, and then it's only at the end that kind of the special questions are brought to Maylis. And then I'm assuming, Maylis, you kind of read through everything, and if you see something that you're like, I have questions about this, then you would chat, or are you kind of like, this looks fine?
It's not. Yeah, it's really that once the rights have been bought and it's in the hands of the new publisher, it's not, there's nothing, I guess I wanted to make that clear. Like, we're so lucky to have the relationship we have with Maylis and to be able to ask her, but she has no obligation to the work in English. Yeah.
Got it.
Also, I don't feel competent I don't have any competencies to judge a translation, but I can hear something, not in particular, not in details, and I don't practice English, and I don't have a so strong English that I could judge any work made by Jessica, or even by Sam, of course, but I can hear something, and I can hear the rhythm, I can hear the flow, I can see how the sentences are swallowing, you know, I can feel many things as an author. And but for me, really, I think that the translator is the author of is a kind of author, you know. In I always quote that that sentence told by the great poet in France named Emmanuel Ocar, and Emmanuel Ocar wrote that a translator is not someone who translates text, he writes this translation. So you see, it is a matter of writing. So for me, I'm convinced that I have to allow and to abandon also my text, and I don't have any feeling like those of a propriétaire of my work. I don't have that kind of relationship to my book. I don't feel I am the owner of my book and it belongs to me, and it is not my way of thinking. And I felt very confident with Jessica, and it's for me, the thing she's a poetess and also a musician was very important, in fact. And you know, when I read the two translations of Men the Living, I thought Jessica's one has many things to see with the matter of voices, the feeling of voices, the presence of voices. Perhaps both of Sam were very pulsating, energetic, and very active one. You know, they were not the two translation. They did not hold the same matter of text and same texture. They were quite different, and I could feel that, and it was I could do it. Yes.
That's such a like wonderful, like generative kind of thing to think about, the translator as authoring their own sort of separate volume, and we'll speak about the sort of particulars of the language in your novels. I want to take a sidebar, because you said that you mentioned your English, and I just want to say how remarkable it is to me, and how much I think English speakers take for granted that many artists are operating very comfortably in a language that is not their first language, and doing so at a level that many native English speakers could not aspire to. So thank you for speaking with us. So what I want to talk about the themes of Painting Time, but also Men the Living, and in your other novels too. I'm not sure if you would think of them this way, but one of the reasons that I love them so much is that, to me, they are novels about work in a way. And I am always looking for representations of work in fiction, because I think it's one of the most important things, and present things in human life, and it's very rare to me, I think,
yes,
to see like true
yes,
representations of, especially, all work is specific in and of itself, but so in the case here, And, I'm going to commend myself for my bravery and practicing how to say the phrase trompe l'œil many times, because my tongue struggles with that phrase. But for those of you who are in the audience who have not had a chance to read the novel yet, it is about a group of craftspeople, kind of artisans in the work of the trick of the eye painting, sort of forging reality is one way you could kind of think of it. And so it focuses on one in particular, but a group of 3 students who meet in this very kind of highly rarefied school for people who want to learn this style of painting. And so they learn how to recreate things like stones or wood, the very texture of life itself. And the applications for that can be in movie backdrops, or one of the opening passages of an early passage of the novel, she describes making an entry foyer for a building out to make it look like this very expensive, like luxurious marble, but it's via paint. And it's just like, I can just live in these passages because they're so specific, and about something I've never thought about and know nothing about. So I want to talk about, Maylis, when you write fiction, it's a form of translation itself, I think, of these types of work. And that was true in Men the Living / The Heart as well, talking in very specific detail about medicine. And so I'm wondering if you could sort of speak about not only your research process, but also the writing process of translating these, because we are, most people who are reading this will have no idea how to paint, marble patinas, but you make it so real.
In fact, I'm starting my books from far, I have to approach and to reach a world that is completely unknown for me, in terms of world, I mean, a sociological, professional, historical, and a world completely unknown. And I like very much this kind of epic gesture, to put myself and to enter into a new world that I'm going to represent. And this is all this kind of gesture is about of language. So I have to when I imagine a character, I start with a kind of motif, as we say in painting, a motif that can be, for example, here it was the prehistoric caves that have been recreated as facsimile in France. 2 major sites of construction opened in 2015 and 2016, one in Ardèche in the south of France and one in Lascaux. And I was wondering why people were doing so many efforts and are spending so much money to recreate false form, to clone this prehistoric cave. And I am very personally fond of prehistoric times, and very interested by all that period, and passionate. I have a passion for that period. And I wanted, so I started to imagine a character, a young girl who could be among all those craftsmen and craftswomen who were working on this in this construction sites. And I've been there to see. I went to visit the work site, and it was very, very interesting and an intense period. And when I was starting to dream about that book, but in fact, that book became shift towards polars, and the book became a Bildungsroman of what is to learn, what is to learn how to paint the surfaces of the world, and what is to know the world by painting the surfaces as marble, stones, as you said, and woods, and so on. And you know, in my work, the fiction is leading to documentation. It is not the contrary. I mean, and there is an organic play that occurs between imagination and documentation. I mean, when I'm starting to write, I say, so what is that? What is she doing? This girl, where has she learned to do that? So I went to Brussels, and in Brussels everything was so different, so rich, because I discovered myself, all the marbles, all the woods, all the brushes, all the pigments, all the color, all the technique, all the gesture, all the solvents, that the book changed a lot in my mind. And this what I discovered leads me towards, for example, the Cinecittà after to Moscow. You know, the book is full. I never do the research before writing, because for me it's too heavy, it's too scholar also. You always think that you don't have to forget to write about that, and to write about, it does not work like that. Fiction is sensibility, imagination, I mean connection. It's to see, to discover the secret relationship between one thing and another thing. It's to think, to reproach, associate ideas, and so on. And things very important for me in terms of feeling I am a translator is that when I'm doing my research, and when I'm going from place to place, because I love to go to the place where the books takes place, I harvest language, sentences, oral expressions, I harvest vocabularies, I harvest words. And I also have paths to discover, I mean, huge parts of technical lexic, for example. It was the case when I was writing Men the Living, The Heart, and also when I was writing Painting Time, because I discovered quite at the same new language, a language that I don't possess before writing, before the fiction. I mean, it is fiction that is a kind of initiation to my own language. And that's very, very interesting for me, because the lexical, the vocabularies I discover, they are not considered in French literature, in the story of French literature, as if they could carry a literal dignity. They are considered like low pieces of the language, the technical vocabulary. It's not enough glamorous form novel. It's, you understand, it's not sexy, it's awful. I realized that when I was writing Birth of a Bridge, which is a novel of the building of a bridge with a huge working place. You have to concrete and many workers, and I love to discover what was the vocabulary of the concrete, for example. But it was considered as if it was not enough glamorous for literal novel. It is not enough academic, as language. And I think for me, it's very important to reactivate them and give them back their dignity, and by insert these words in my sentences, and by giving them a new life, perhaps. But because when some works disappear, in terms of arts and craft, some works are disappearing. And and with their death disappears also their language. I mean, so all the names of the brushes, all the name of the marbles, of the name of the colors, of the name of the pigments, there were. It was for me very important to enlight them in my language, and I also have an aesthetic skill, because I think by inserting that kinds of words, I can reach its friction, you know, in the very sometimes more academic and the novel, la phrase du roman, the sentence of the novel, it can destabilize, you know, it makes the all tremble, and I love this tremble. For me, it's important to make the language tremble. And so I'm thinking I'm like a translator, because I discover my own French when I am writing at the time. And I want to say that Marcel Proust, he said that the beautiful book, and I don't know, its painting time is beautiful, but it's the idea which is interesting. He says the beautiful book are always written in a sort of foreign language. That and I love this sentence, because I like very much when, as a reader, to see, not to enter in a book where all is very civilized and but when the language is a little bit troubled. You
Yes.
yeah.
That's such a beautiful way of putting it. And I mean, and that is the experience that you give to the reader, because it does feel, I mean, there's a lot of friction is a great way of putting it to you, because your mind kind of catches on these words and concepts that are not familiar, but the way that you incorporate them, they do, we can understand them and sort of have a sense of them, even while they retain this kind of mystery. And I will just say, I didn't know until I read this novel that you could not visit Lascaux. I just thought of it as a place that was always available to be visited. And then reading about it and reading about the process of creating these facsimiles of this, you know, monumental site, I was like so moved and I was suddenly felt like how painful it was that I would never see this place. So, but because I have your novel, I feel like I can go.
And I want to add something, just a very simple idea, but we always missed that literature, and especially novel, is for me as the power of holding knowledge. You know, it can be the vehicle of the vehiculate. Novel can vehiculate can hold knowledge.
Yeah.
And for me, it's very, very important, because I think that as I told you, when I was a teenager, I read a lot to know the world. I used fictions and especially novels to know the past, the present, and all the lives I had no access to.
Yes. Well, I want to have the audience to have an opportunity to sort of hear what this sounds like. So we are asking Jessica and Maylis to read a passage from the novel, and I was like, oh, we'll have plenty of time, but now I'm like, oh, we're actually going to run out of time, because there's so many amazing things to talk about. And I do want to hear from Jessica about how she approaches this kind of rushing, the amazing momentum of this language. But so if you could each read they're going to read the same passage, Maylis in the French, and then Jessica in her English translation.
Okay, I start in French?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Le programme à présent. La voix a monté d'un cran, les yeux luisent, noirs d'aniline, laqués. La session dure d'octobre à mars, 6 mois, considérés comme une période creuse pour les peintres en bâtiment. Dès la rentrée, on peindra les bois. les chênes, qui sont loin d'être les plus faciles, mais aussi l'orme, par exemple, ou le frêne, l'ébène de Macassar, l'acajou du Congo, la gerbe de peuplier, le poirier, la ronce, ceux que je jugerais bon de savoir peindre. Mi-novembre, on attaque les marbres. Carrare, Grand Antique, Labrador, Henriette blonde, Fleur de pêcher ou Griotte d'Italie. Et là encore, je choisirai en temps voulu. L'énumération de ces noms est bien autre chose qu'une table des matières. La femme prend à les prononcer un plaisir visible et sa voix ondule dans la pièce comme un chant chamanique dont Paula ne capte rien, sinon le rythme. Mi-janvier, ce sont les pierres précieuses, les lapis et les citrines, les topazes et les jades, les améthystes et les quartz. En février, le dessin, la perspective, puis les moulures et les frises, les plafonds de style et les patines. En mars, la dorure et l'argenture, le pochoir, le lettrage publicitaire et enfin le diplôme. Tout cela assez dense, assez consistant.
So this is the director of the Art Institute in Brussels who's speaking to Paula before she's even begun. The current program, the voice has risen a notch, the eyes shine aniline black, lacquered, lasts from October to March, the 6 months considered off-peak for house painters. Starting from the first week, we paint wood. Oaks, which are by no means the easiest, and also elm, for example, or ash, Macassar ebony, Congo mahogany, the crown of the poplar, the pear tree, the walnut, whatever species I judge important to know how to paint. In mid-November, we start on marble. Carrara, Grand Antique, Labrador, Henriette Blonde, Fleur de Pêcher, Red Griotte, and here again I will decide in due course. The enumeration of these names is more than just a table of contents, and the woman takes a visible pleasure in pronouncing them. Her voice undulates through the room like a shamanic chant, and Paula understands nothing but the rhythm. In mid-January, it's the semi-precious stones, lapis and citrine, topaz and jade, amethyst, clear quartz. In February, drawing, perspective first, then moldings and friezes, ceilings and patinas. In March, we do gilding and silver plating, stenciling and commercial lettering, and then finally the diploma. All this is fairly dense, fairly substantial.
Thank you so much for reading that. I want to, I will open to questions in a few moments, but I want to ask Jessica, and this is, I'm sorry to leave such a big question for when we have a few moments, but I mean, one of the things that I find sort of characteristic about Maylis's prose is the momentum. So there's some very long sentences that really kind of have this sort of forward rushing quality that I have no idea how you would, kind of translate those. I'm thinking about if I were to bring that from English, for example, into another language, it would really be difficult for me. So how do you kind of approach her style, and how much of your own style sort of melds with that?
So yeah, I think you said this rushing kind of style. There's like a dizzying aspect to it, and that what we come to know as this characteristic cadence of Maylis's work, which really has, the rhythm is a huge element of it, and it's a huge part of the beauty. And I think English doesn't lend itself as well as French does to the sustained sentences, but there are ways still to come at it, and I get into I do a lot of reading aloud while I'm translating. I'll read both the French out loud and then my translation out loud, so that I can really inhabit it on a sound level. And just in terms of my process, I don't know if this has anything to do with the rush of her sentences, but I do work very fast for the first go through. For me is just a really slapdash, a dirty draft. And there may be something about the length of the sentences that allows me to go in a really rapid way, but then the revision is where the crafting and the beauty of the rhythm will really come in. So I think it has a lot to do with the reading aloud. And then I find I'm adding, there are more dashes. For example, I have a real weakness for dashes, but dashes help a lot because you can extend, elongate something without just
Indefinitely. It could go on forever.
keep on going. Yeah.
So the M dash, yeah, because I'm curious. I mean, I, have like high school level French, so nothing that could approach being able to read something like this in the original. And so I'm sort of grammatically, does like the tools that does what English have to offer, can it kind of cover Mylis's original with good use of M dashes, or are you reworking sentences?
Well, you always have to rework sentences. But for example, I want to give the example of the first sentence of Réparer les vivants, of Mend the Living, where it's one sentence that lasts for a page and a half, and it's so important, right? It sets us up for what the book is going to be and what this journey is going to be. And to me, it was really important to not cut that first sentence. So I think that if it was a sentence that I encountered in the middle of the book, I might have felt more inclined to lean towards what would be more in keeping with an English audience's what they would expect. But it was really important to me to hold the continuity and the expanse of that first one. So I used all the things I could. I used commas, I used a semicolon, I used dashes, and yes, there were enough tools that I could do it.
Thank you. That is something I have always wondered about. And finally, I'm monitoring. So if you do have a question, please put it in the Q&A. And this is your moment. So I hope you will come up with some questions, but I have plenty to ask if you do not. And so Jessica, you're a poet and a musician, a songwriter as well, but I think your most recent collection is The Whole Singing Ocean. Is collection the right way to describe it? Or is it one narrative? It's a narrative poem, sort of one long one?
Yeah, I've got a story in fragments and in poetic fragments. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you tell us about this? And I, from what I've read of it, I haven't had the opportunity to read it yet. I apologize. But it involves something that really happened, a boat school. And it sort of also seems to talk about a kind of specific milieu, like on the ocean, with bringing a lot of different themes in. So I would love for you to just share with us sort of what it's about, and then also how your kind of work as a translator does or does not kind of trouble your own work and feed your own work.
Well, that's a nice question. So The Whole Singing Ocean is, it begins with a true story that was told to me by a boat builder. And the original kernel of the story that he told me was just one moment, and it was of him swimming when he was a child, swimming to meet the eye of a whale. And so that I carried that with me for a long time without knowing how to engage with it or enter it, except that it was this like powerful, almost talismanic moment for me. And then when I saw him again, some years later, he had discovered that the boat school, which is a French countercultural boat school called the École en Bateau, that had been the subject of a court case and significant investigation. And he was learning about this from a great distance. He wasn't French himself, and so he couldn't even read the articles or understand the documentaries that were happening. So I sort of engaged with him in the discovery of this terrible, dark underbelly to what had been an incredible adventure, this like, opportunity of a lifetime to be discovering ancient cultures. And the kids on board were the crew and everything, but there was this other terrible side, and the director of the boat school was charged with pedophilia. So this story has the whole Singing Ocean has a number of threads that come together in different voices. And I think in terms of handling the book, the most crucial, delicate, difficult thing was that it was people's true stories that I was telling. So I didn't want to embellish or invent at all around those true stories. And I wanted to honor them side by side and handle this multiplicity of voices, which included taking me into some of my own things from my own childhood and things from my mother's story. And then in terms of translation, informing my work, I think just because I'm so often inhabiting sentences from Maylis or from, I haven't translated that many other authors. So I do cite, without even meaning to, they'll show up in my own work. And I have cited Maylis twice in the whole Singing Ocean. And in my first book, Everything Now, I was much more directly engaging with translation, where I was translating the novel, a poetic novel called Turkana Boy by Jean-François Beauchemin, at the same time that I was writing. And in that one, I was taking pieces from my translation that would serve as either the formal constraints, as in a glossa poem, or just as taking a sentence to spark a piece for myself. So they were really, really deeply, translation and writing were really deeply woven together for that one.
Thank you. I'm very intrigued to read the whole Singing Ocean from your description. So we have some questions. So Melanie asks, for Jessica, where do you begin with your translation? Do you read through and take notes? Do you translate from start to finish in a linear way? And at what point do you begin revisions?
So I do read through. At first, I don't take notes. I just read and sometimes even partially skim. Should I admit that? I've always read it thoroughly by the time I'm doing the revisions, but sometimes before I begin, I will have just read it to get a sense, and then I do go start to finish. Although I think there have been times with Birth of a Bridge, the beginning is for me was the most dense, and so in order to just find my own feet in it, I had to start from a point about a third in and work, and then go back to the beginning. But usually I would work through from start to finish. And how much? What was the last part of that question? How much?
And then at what point do you begin revisions?
Yeah, so I'll have done a draft, and then usually we'll have the chance to leave it for at least a couple of weeks and then go back and start the first revision. And there are usually at least 3 revisions. Yeah.
Thank you. And the second question from Lara is for Maylis. I haven't finished the novel yet, but I'm curious about time in the text. Time feels both the attention to the work, the present tense, and the passing or progression of Paula's career. Could Maylis talk about her examination of time scales and perhaps choice of tense? Oh, we are muted.
Muted.
Yeah. There we go.
Excusez-moi, sorry. So time for me, in that book, it was very important because I was wondering what is to be a contemporanean writer? What is to be contemporanean? And I was very interested by the fact that it could be catching, seizing all the layers of time, but together. Like a wall where you have layers by layer, les couches après couches, les strats. Strats, on dit aussi strates. Stratas of time, but you hold it together. And for me, it could be the best definition of being contemporanean. And when I was writing the book, I was always looking at the feeling, the sensation of time. Could be that in fact it is leading action. I mean, in France you have in France you have the indicative present, what we call in terms of verb, le présent de l'indicatif, in present of indicative. It's a way of writing, and this time it gives you an idea of present as it was a second, sudden, a slice, a minuscule slice of a second, and also eternity at the same time. That kind of time in the writing can give you both matters of present. What is to be present? It is to be in action and in reaction in front of something, but also you can reach eternity. And for me, it was very interesting because Lascaux, I have not been in Lascaux, the real one, but I saw other caves that have been painted at the same age, in Fond de Gaume, for example, or in Pêche-Mer, and you are experiencing the feeling to be in front of time, to be in front of the time. And when you see, for example, a hand that has been penned 20,000 years ago, and I would like to, when I was writing, one of my purpose was to give that idea, to be in front of the time, to be a little person emerge in all that stratas of time. For example, when she is trying to reproduce the tortoise shell, or when she's looking in the carrier of stone, and she's thinking that perhaps in Versailles, in Versailles, she could have been all the fish that are in the basins could have seen Louis XIV walking around his palace and so on. So you are connecting all the kind of time together. And for me, it was I wrote the book feeling myself as if I was immersed in all that kind of time, not only actuality, but always anachronical time. I could say that.
That's a passage I loved and also circled when you talk about Versailles. So finally, briefly, I guess this will be our last question from Fiona. This is a question for Jessica. How does one get their start in the world of French-English translation? I actually translated Maylis's Assistat de la Nuit for my senior honors thesis a couple years ago and would love to continue this work in a professional context.
That's so wonderful. Okay,
Yes.
so how I got started was, I did my master's, and that didn't lead me to having contacts. I think the first thing I would say is find something that you adore. You know, that when I chose Turkana to immerse myself in as the first translation I did, it was because I loved it. And then I felt really strongly as the agent of that book. I prepared a sample of it, and I prepared an introduction to the author and to myself, and I had sent that to publishers, and then I waited a long time before I got an answer. And I was in the same position when I was translating Naissance d'un pont, or Birth of a Bridge. I was the one to find it and love it, and then pitch it to the publisher. I don't know if that helps, but I really feel that the love piece is so important, because then you can really stand behind the book that it is that you're proposing to Anglophone publishers.
Well, Jessica, thank you, because I've learned so much from this conversation just on the technical side. I had no idea that once, a publisher took on, the role of contracting with a translator, the author is sort of not involved, as involved as they, would like to be, but not in a legal, or contractual way. And then also I did not realize that translators are kind of you would find something and say, oh, I really want to translate this, and you kind of offer yourself. I think if you aren't familiar with this world, you just kind of imagine that you're in some sort of like directory of translators, and someone's like, you will now translate this. So thank you for correcting our misapprehensions, or my misapprehensions. And we are at 1 hour. Maylis and Jessica, thank you both so much. Maylis, thank you for this novel. It's so, and just hearing you speak, I feel like I want to take what you've said to my own work, and I just appreciate it so much. So thank you both for your time.
Thanks, Lydia.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lydia. Thank you.
Is the book. Please buy it. Buy it from the Center for Fiction using the links in the chat. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Melanie, also. Thank you. And Lee and Lisa also. Thank you.
So much to mine from this conversation, and thanks to our audience too. And we'll see you all again soon, I hope.
Okay, bye.